To those who underestimate me, I will prove you wrong. No enemy or ally will stand in my way.
One of the most notable families in the Noxian aristocracy, the House of Medarda would fall into conflict over a succession crisis. To explain the house's origin, according to legend, a Shuriman trader, Iskender Medarda, befriended a Noxian explorer in the deserts of Nashrame, one of the southernmost settlements in the Noxian Empire. Iskender Medarda would learn the Noxian ways and would assimilate into Noxian culture, fully integrating himself into its imperial rhetoric, strength above all. As for the explorer, who showed him these ways, he would, unfortunately, be killed by Iskender Medarda himself, and would take the land and titles of the explorer himself. With the prestige obtained, the Medarda clan would become one of the Empire's most respected and powerful houses. By 979 years after the founding of Noxus, Ambessa Medarda would lead an invasion against a fortified palace in the Kamagra region territory, seizing it from the ancient and wealthy Bainan family, which has roots in the distant lands of Ionia. The palace estate would come under the ownership of House Medarda, further enriching the noble family. Within the deep halls of the palace, Ambessa discovered imprisoned Vestaya locked within the halls. The Vestaya were a chimeric magical race of Runeterra who contain animalistic features. The now freed Vestaya and their leader, Caprian, struck a deal with Ambessa. In exchange for overthrowing their Ionian masters, he would instead give her information on a guide towards Ionia itself, which the Medardan warrior agreed, and for so would remember this information. Then, the last living member of the Binan family, Lady Mion, would be taken prisoner by the Noxians. Mbessa, however, saw this as an opportunity to harden her 15-year-old daughter Mel emotionally. Mbessa then gave her daughter Mel a test. Does Mel wish to spare or to kill? Mel would unfortunately, in her mother's eyes, show weakness and chose to spare Lady Mion. It was then, in cold blood, Mbessa executed the last lady and last living member of the Binan family, all right before the eyes of her daughter, leaving the young Mel traumatized. Back within the established Noxian settlement of Belzun, the host lord and patriarch of the clan, Menelik Medarda, was coming to the end of his life, and was poised to name his successor. Upon returning to Belzun, Ambessa attended the Reckoner pits to alleviate any tension, where its Grand Reckoner and reigning champion, Navus, a basilisk rider, would battle against a young girl named Rel for his opponent. In the basking arena of live, entertaining combat, the champion would fall, and the young Rel would become the new champion and Grand Reckoner of Belzun, which impressed the Lady Medarda who was in attendance. She would remember her name, though, for now, Ambessa had some more important businesses to attend to. It was then, in the Medarda compound, where Menelik was lying on his deathbed and many of his family members made their claims, finally came to a decision on who would become his heir and inherit the host lord position of the house. However, before he could make his proclamation, Menelik was clandestinely assassinated by Rudo, Mel's biological father. Rudo, a mage from the far distant lands of the Shuriman continent, committed such action to spare Ambessa the anguish of being overlooked in favor of her cousin, Typhik, whom Menelik intended to name as his successor to become the host lord of the house. When the lifeless body of Menelik was found, Typhik publicly accused Ambessa of being the perpetrator. The public accusation, though in truth was false, rallied many of the stewards to grant their support for Typhik's claim to inherit the head position. Hearing the accusation being thrown against her, Ambessa immediately stormed out of the Medarda compound. Now that her claim is all but compromised, with many of the present stewards, and even within her own family, all but against her, Ambessa would depart to gather allies that could support her claim, knowing inevitably a war of secession would come to fruition. As Ambessa attempted to gather allies outside of the compound, within the busy shimmering market, her daughter Mel met with a hooded mage who began to hold quite a friendly conversation with her. Little did she know, this would be the first and only conversation that we know of that she would have with her own biological father, Rudo. To note, 15 years ago, Rudo was a wandering mage and was part of a tribe that worshipped the sun. This tribe was known as the Rakor. This tribe boasts many skilled artisans, craftspeople, and merchants. However, they tend to value a simple life of humility and prayer to the celestial heavens. In Rudo's young life, he was raised in a secret cabal, though in this recounting, this cabal was the Black Rose, and Rudo was considered one of the Pale Woman's best mages. As Rudo grew older, he met and fell in love with Ambessa Medarda in the city settlement of Basilisk, and would secretly have an affair. This affair would result in the birth of Mel. To keep her hidden, Rudo and Ambessa agreed to separate in their relationship and also agreed to keep their distance. But Rudo unfortunately couldn't help but approach Mel in disguise and speak to her in Belzun, which brings this recounting back to their encounter in the shimmering markets. The father and daughter would engage in some conversation within the market before Mel decided to accept Rudo's offer to receive a set of Rakor tattoos, unaware that they were being given to her by her father. The tattoos, unbeknownst to her, while seemingly ordinary, concealed many magical runic symbols that would protect her from magical attacks. This was the work of those powerful mages far away in the west of the Shuriman continent. By this time, the determined Ambessa attempted to persuade the stewards of Tranit, Kilgrove, and Krexor to support her claim of inheritance. However, her efforts were unfortunately futile, as all three of these houses rejected and turned their backs against her claim. Out of any other options, Ambessa sets plans to leave Belzun, setting sail for the Immortal Bastion in the mainland continent of Valoran, to deliver the Vestayan Caprian to Borum Darkwill, whom she took as a prisoner, hoping to give the Vestayan as tribute to the Grand General. It was along the way that Ambessa remembered the young girl, the name of the young girl who became the new Grand Reckoner of Belzun. When Rel achieved her victory and became the new Grand Reckoner, the excitement quickly faded, for her parents were the Canwells. The Canwells did not have a fine reputation within the Noxian nobility, being of a lower house without much in their personal treasury, falling into hardships during the reign of Boram Darkwill, and Rel's own father being discharged from the Noxian military after sustaining a debilitating wound. The family treated Rel harshly, scolding, arguing, and abusing their daughter. Even after Rel became the Grand Reckoner of Belzun, it still persisted and continued, leaving the young Rel to, rightfully so, feel nothing but resentment for her parents. It was then Ambessa would approach Rel in her home and propose that Rel join her and be part of her personal warband, the Wolf's Raptors, seeing this as an opportunity to leave her family and their abuse. Rel immediately accepted. With Ambessa, along with her commanding lieutenant Rictus, took Rel, the prisoner Caprian, and the Wolf's Raptors to the harbor in preparation to set sail for the mainland. To ensure her departure went as smoothly as possible, Ambessa allied herself with the Sons of Belzun, a Shuriman rebel group resisting the Noxian occupation of the city. She instructed them to attack any Medardan ships that were not hers, with particular emphasis on targeting Typhek's vessels. As the party set out to sail, Rel, who had never ventured out of Belzun, was not accustomed to sea travel. She easily became seasick. She even regretted leaving Belzun at all. She would then venture down to the lower decks, to the stables where the horses were housed, feeling that this was as close to solid ground as she could get. Lieutenant Rictus noticed this and reassured the young girl, and helped her become accustomed to the waves. And soon, Rel was a lot more comfortable in the smooth traveling amongst the seas. As they sailed past the coast of Tranit, Ambessa's fleet came under attack from a group of unmarked ships. With no other option, she and her warband abandoned their vessels, making for the northern coast. After washing ashore, Ambessa and a surviving portion of her warriors were swiftly apprehended by a warband under House Tranit, revealing themselves to be the very attackers who ambushed them in the sea. They were then taken into custody and transported to Tranit for imprisonment. However, through swift thinking, Ambessa broke free from the restraints and was able to escape alongside only 4 of the attendants of her warband, her Lieutenant Rictus, the young warrior Mel, and the Vestayan Caprian. She is forced to leave the rest of her surviving warband behind and march through the Great Barrier towards Vindor. It would take 2 months for them to reach their target, but Ambessa was determined to see it through. She was determined to take her house back by force, by any means necessary. With Ambessa desiring to show her worth through the imperial rhetoric of strength and force, her daughter, Mel, pursued her desire to show strength through words and negotiations, something that is heavily frowned upon in the Medarda Code, and in the Empire as a whole. To show her worth still, Ambessa befriends Tivadar, Typhek's youngest daughter, in Belzun, which later becomes a blood bond. This was to see an attempt to navigate the imperial politics to gain favor. Though, around the same time, behind closed doors, a mysterious mage named Inai, a mage who was a member of the Black Rose, began to forge rune soldiers. Soldiers who were physically enhanced by rune alteration for Typhek to prepare for the expected clash with Ambessa. To understand why the Black Rose would be aiding Typhix's side was all part of LeBlanc's scheme to install him as a puppet, which would allow the Black Rose to manipulate House Medarda. Once their creation of the Rune Soldiers was complete, they began conducting brutal experiments on the young, kidnapped mages towards developing a technique involving magical transference and nullification. After their 2-month journey through the Great Barrier Mountains, Ambessa and her warband of 4 were attacked by a pack of wild drakehounds, severely injuring the party. Luckily, they were rescued by Vendoran scouts led by their steward Eminensis. After being escorted to their home city, Ambessa learns of Eminensis' bitter history between themselves and Steward Gion of Falgren, who has allied himself with Typhik. And she uses this information to provoke House Vindor into offering a ship for faster travel. When Gion arrived at the city of Vindor to demand for Ambessa' surrender, Eminensis fully commits to her side, refusing his requests, and as a result, aligning House Vindor with Ambessa. In retaliation, Gion informed his allies of Tranit and his own House of Falgren to mobilize their ships and form a blockade. With Vindor's harbor cut off by Tranit and Falgren ships, they decided to ride to the Immortal Bastion on Swifthorns, escaping a potential clash and potential capture. Thanks to their swift escape, the warband was able to reach the Immortal Bastion, the heart of the Noxian Empire. Once Ambessa finally got her foot on the grounds of the Immortal Bastion, she immediately took the Vestayan Caprian to the Grand General Borum Darkwill. Upon this visit, Ambessa gave Caprian to Darkwill as a tribute, stating that Caprian knew a way to guide the Noxian forces to the distant lands of Ionia. In return, Ambessa only asked for Darkwill's support in her claims of inheritance of the House Medarda. Darkwill then told her to wait for his decision. In the meantime, Darkwill took the information that was given by Caprian on the potential of reaching Ionia, the potential of reaching new territories to conquer, and the potential of reaching more glory. After Ambessa leaves the tribute to the Grand General, Eminensis approaches her with urgent news. Typhik has sent his army, consisting of his Rune soldiers, to attack Rock Rune. Rock Rune was a place of importance for Ambessa, for her brother, Steward Katye, was one of the few Medarda stewards to ally himself with her early on, as the rest of either backed Typhik or remained neutral. It was then they decided to then leave at once on their Swifthorns to assist in defending the city. Back in the far distant settlement of Belzoon, Azizi, the married husband of Ambessa, decided to remain in Belzoon to prevent any further growth of Typhix's influence in her absence. He commanded a detachment of the Wolves' Reapers to disrupt the flow of goods on the trade routes to Nashrame, which Typhix's forces, who were located in the settlement of Tereshni, heavily relied upon. The disruption of flow of trade would last for a few months. Azizi was then instructed to try and sway Steward Doric to Ambessa's side. If this were to succeed, this would end the imports of bulbo heads, a source of food for soldiers from the settlement of Tyrannit, which was ruled by Typhix's staunchest ally, Steward Smeek. It was then that Azizi, along with his daughter Mel, suddenly had their carriage attacked, leading to his death, while Mel was left severely wounded. Thankfully, however, Mel was rescued by a girl named Alora, who would soon become a close friend of hers. Once the shock was settled, Kino, Mel's half-brother, decided to investigate his father's death in an attempt to uncover those who were responsible. It was then that Kino discovered evidence related to the Black Rose. He did not know or fully understand at this time, but the Black Rose would become his end. Returning to the mainland, Embessus' warband arrived to assist Katye in defending Rockruun from Typhex's army. Deaths occurred on both sides, vying for victory and to deal a decisive blow. It was then, in the heat of battle, that Rel discovers her aptitude for ferromancy, her unique magical ability to control metal. Many of the opposing forces fell, which resulted in the capture of Gentara Medarda, the oldest daughter of Typhek. On Embessus' orders, Rel would execute Gentara using her newly discovered magical abilities. Once the battle was over and the city of Rockruun defended, as a form of further reward, Embessa accepts Rel as her adopted daughter, gifting her a Medarda ring, officially making her a Medarda. In celebration, Embessa gathered her allied family members to introduce Rel to them. However, before Rel can be officially introduced as Embessus' adopted daughter to the rest of the family, Rel was suddenly kidnapped and soon disappeared. No one could uncover her disappearance at this moment, but those responsible, the Black Rose, would have their own plans for the young and now promising Rel. After much deliberation, the Grand General would be pleased with the information Caprian had provided him on the preferred route to Ionia. In turn, Darkwill decides to support Embessus' claim and sends a powerful fleet of ships to support her cause. It was then, at this very time, Embessa Medarda was fully ready to show strength for her claim. It was then, after a short period of time, Rudo, who has now become fully disillusioned with the Black Rose, emerges with Typhex's youngest daughter, Tivadar, after they travel towards the mainland to inform his old lover Embessa of their conspiracy. The conspiracy of the Black Rose to control House Medarda for their own plan and gains. To put an end to Typhek and the Black Rose once and for all, Embessa joins forces with Rudo and Tivadar, uniting around a shared goal to stop Typhek and end this brutal war of succession. As soon as their journey to Tereshni ended, the two opposing warbands of Typhek and Embessa soon came to clash. It was a bloody affair, but the balance of power would shift when it was clear that the naval vessels under Embessus' command were too much for Typhex's forces to repel. By the end, the battle ended decisively. Embessa was victorious. In the aftermath, Typhek Medarda was taken prisoner and presented to Embessa. Once Typhek was brought to his knees, Embessa then turned towards his daughter Tivadar. This made her realize the opportunity to destroy those who could potentially contest her now position of Host Lord of House Medarda. She took a sharp blade and immediately executed Typhek right before his daughter's eyes. With the freshly soaked blade, Embessa then mercilessly executed Tivadar before her father's lifeless body. With her rivals now completely eliminated, Embessa seizes control and ascends as the new host lord and leader of House Medarda. This did not mean that Embessa would go idle in celebration. She soon proceeded to attempt to rescue Rel. From the information that was given to her by Rudo, she led a raid on the laboratory where the Black Rose was conducting experiments on children, but found it soon empty. In retaliation, she ordered her soldiers to begin destroying everything she could find inside. Afterwards, once order was fully restored, and the position of Ambessa Medarda as host lord of House Medarda was fully secured, in a stroll in the desert, Ambessa then encountered a mage. Though this mage was different. Their cloak was of dark red, her skin was pale, and her eyes were of a black hue, with her pupils of pale gold, with the very same color flowing down as if they were tears. It was her, the Pale Woman. It was the leader of the Black Rose. It was LeBlanc. It is unknown what happened in this encounter, nor do we know what was said, but it is clear to us that in the decades to come, the Medardas and the Black Rose would be embroiled in deep hatred and feud for each other. As to where Rel has gone, we cannot say for certain, but it was clear to us that the Black Rose continued experimenting on her, forcing her into combat against other mages to determine the strength of her hemomancy. The experiments that are being conducted by the Black Rose were cruelly simple. Create living weapons to strengthen the Cabal. While imprisoned, Rel swears vengeance upon her captors, the Black Rose, and Noxus itself for letting this happen in their empire. As time passed, Ambessa would make a drastic decision for her daughter Mel, under the pretext that she had failed 2 forms of tests. The first, sparing Lady Binan, and the second, forming a blood bond with Typhex's youngest daughter. It was then Mel Medarda was exiled from Noxus on the orders of her mother. Destination? The advanced City of Progress, a metropolis of invention, the city of Piltover. When she arrived, she was welcomed by her cousin Django to the city. What Mel's purpose was in this exile was to support the Medardas family's interests in the region. When Mel began to navigate the politics of Piltover, she shortly started to gain points within the Piltovan hierarchy. Soon, with the help of Clan Pharos, one of the high mercantile clans of the city, she eventually obtained a seat on Piltover's ruling council, and slowly became the wealthiest person in the city. Despite being a far distance away from the imperial territories of Noxus, Mel was able to carve her own name into becoming one of the most influential political voices amongst the Piltovan councilors. As she pressed forward her agenda to help benefit both herself and the Medardas, the City of Progress would enter into a new era of progress. Progress where it would suffer almost a similar fate of those who were old enough to see the end of the ancient rune wars.
Gone is the Golden Boy, the Hextech dream, the brighter tomorrow. All that's left is me and a mission.